It contains a deep and rooted sense of hopefulness.
She's unclothed, pregnant, and it seems like it gives priority to nature, to our nature, to our natural side that we all share.
I want to welcome all of you to the exhibit of contemporary Iranian photography at California State University, Los Angeles. And I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to some of the fascinating features of contemporary Iranian art and photography by talking about a number of traits and characteristics which I believe reveal the zeitgeist, reveal the context within which these works were created. First and foremost is the issue of identity in contemporary Iranian photography. Identity in the West has always been defined in terms of individual traits and individual characteristics, and is an individuated phenomenon. But in Iran, especially in contemporary Iran, unlike, let us say, 19th century Iran or the Pahlavi Iran, contemporary Iranian notions of identity are always defined in terms of opacification and opalescence of identity, or they're defined in terms of state, they're defined in terms of cultural signs. One never really finds identity defined as something stable, solid, and anchored. In this work by Mohammad Ghazali, Self-Portrait, Untitled, and that's very important as he calls it untitled, because it communicates the inexplicable and mystifying facets of the identity here. You can see that in the upper row, he has images of himself that are slightly changing and that the eyes are closed, and one comes to terms with his identity in terms of flux and in terms of all the other random juxtapositions and mysterious and inexplicable and arcane elements which are communicated through abstract imagery. So we really cannot say that we can identify him as a unique personality in a given time and space, as something that is anchored, but that his identity is a matter of flux, is a matter of infinite other factors and intermediaries that have come together to define him. And this is definitely one of the main features of the works of Shadi Qadirian. The works of Peyman Houshmandzadeh are very interesting in the sense that he communicates identity in terms of cultural signs. And in his Hand and Belt series or the Mustache series, we come to terms with the kind of people that we're dealing with, not as individual entities so much, but as members of a cultural milieu, members of a certain economic strata. So as one looks at his Hands and Belt series, one realizes that we can tell the kind of education this person must have had, the kind of even income that he makes, and the outlooks that he has on women, on men, on society, on religion, and so forth and so on. So these signs, these semiotic issues that he deals with, again, communicate identity not as an individual entity, but as a cultural phenomenon. I have found the works of Qadirian fascinating, not only because of this concept of opalescence of identity that I brought out, but also because of the fact that her women, which she always represents in her photographs, are completely taken over by Islamic prescriptions, by religious dogma. And yet, they are also asked to be modern enough to perform all kinds of daily and quotidian functions. There seems to be a seamless connection between the past and the present in her works, where the Islamic State, on the one hand, wants the female to remain wholly traditional, and on the other hand, asks the female to enter into the modern world and perform all of those duties that will, in fact, serve the state and serve the elite and serve the men and serve everyone who seems to be benefiting from the female in this particular formula. To talk about identity communicated as cultural signs, the works of Amir Ali Qasemi are in fact right on, in the sense that when one looks at these pictures, the faces are all washed out. One does not see them as individuals, but one can again come to terms with them in terms of their mannerisms and the kind of parties that they have and where they're having these parties and the kind of clothing that they're wearing. So as we look at them, we can even tell whether these parties are taking place in Tehran or they're taking place in Kerman or taking place in Tabriz, because the notion of the identity seems to have been defined in the works of Amir Ali Qasemi in terms of cultural attitudes and cultural behaviors and historical and traditional survivals and identifications within the Iranian community. In Tirafkan, identity comes across in terms of mass psychology. So most of his figures are stereotyped and conventionalized. These images are always evoking a sense of humanity being a pawn within certain theatrical constructs, within certain theatrical stages. And thus we see them moving along with the same actions and with the same outlooks and with the same beliefs. In one sense, the concept of the theocratic state comes across very powerfully in the works of Tirafkan. Even though he himself was religious, these issues are raised viscerally within his works. Mirrors seem to be a very ubiquitous part of contemporary Iranian art and photography. In fact, in a way, they remind me of a poem by William Butler Yeats. Mirror on mirror, mirrored is all the show. What does it mean? And in this piece by Samir Ali Khanzadeh, what these mirrors communicate, first and foremost, is that we see everything through the mirror of religion, the mirror of cultural reality, the mirror of the novels we've read, the mirror of how we're supposed to have defined ourselves. And in fact, those who look at these images see themselves in these images. And these images as well become a mirror for their personalities, for their realities, and for the kind of roles that they play within society. Now, a lot of other works, for example, by Mohsen Yazdipour and some other artists, define the concept of identity in terms of the state. Samira doesn't define it in terms of the state, but a lot of other artists, as Nietzsche says, come to see themselves as a pawn of the state, and so they define themselves as such. When I began to study contemporary Iranian photography, nothing excited me more than this concept of metaphysical, physical reversal. Although I'm quite sure that the artists did not come up with these ideas intellectually, and these were mostly visceral, but the importance of this metaphysical, physical reversal is that we begin to see how certain ideologies, how certain metaphysical and religious constructs are undermined by the everyday reality of life. In this work by Parastu Furuhar called Freitag or Friday, which itself is a metaphysical sign, it is the holy day of the week in the Muslim calendar, Furuhar shows 4 panels of religious chador, or the veil that the women are supposed to wear in order to be hidden beneath it, in order to be protected by religious dogma and by certain social and political constructs. As much as the female is hidden by the veil, and the female is in fact totally obscured by these religious ideas, what comes across through the hand that holds this chador is the sign of the female's sexuality. What comes across is the physical presence of the female. So no matter how many metaphysical constructs come in to hide the female and to suppress her, her physical nature pushes through. And this is a beautiful piece by Parastouf-Ruher. The next piece we're going to talk about, which also reverses this metaphysical physical construct, is again by Parastouf-Ruher, and it is an old bald man under the chador. So we're going to look at that right now. This is another work by Parastouf-Ruher that exemplifies this notion of physical metaphysical reversal. The chador is supposed to be worn by the female, and as I said earlier, in order, according to Islamic law, to protect the female from the gaze of the male. But what Parastouf does, she reverses this hierarchy and places an old balding man under the chador. Her point is succinct, namely, the person who needs protection is this insecure male who has continuously pushed the female down, who has continuously hidden the female in order to protect his own interests. The pieces that have intellectually moved me very deeply are the works of Muhammad Ghazali called Where the Heads of the Renowned Rest. And these pieces are the best examples of physical metaphysical reversal. Ghazali, when you look at his photographs, you realize they're nothing but mundane, quotidian images of city life, of urban life. But what he has actually done is that he's gone to the monuments, to the idealized images of the Iranian culture, and he has taken photographs of the city from their perspectives, from the perspectives of these sculptures, of these statues scattered throughout the city of Tehran. He said, I did it because I was always looking up to these images and I was saying to myself, I want to be like them. But one day I said, I love these images, I adore them, I idealize them, I idolize them. What are they looking at as I look at them? So I went to the sculptures and I took images from their perspectives. And what I found out was that Dr. Hisabi, one of the most famous of Iranian heroes, is looking at two garbage cans. Or in the case of Saadi, what we see is a very mundane, quotidian sight. So what he shows us is that there are two worlds that we belong to. One is the world of the ideal that we construct. One is the Apollonian world, which in fact transcends us above the earth and above everything that we truly are. And the other world is where we live and we want to deny it. We want to ignore it, and we should not ignore it. We should be a part of it. So all metaphysical constructs of the Iranian society, be they mythic, mythopoeic, or religious, begin to crumble as one looks at the photographs of Muhammad Ghazali. You know, hair has become a ubiquitous part of contemporary Iranian photography, especially in photography. We see it in the works of Barbad Golshiri, we see it in the works of Mandana Muqaddam. And here I'm going to talk about one example, namely these panels done by Katayun Karami. When you look at them, as one looks at the images from one side, it's the same image, her face, nothing changes. As one looks at it from another direction, there are different hairstyles. What she communicates is that no matter how I change my hairstyle, how I try to empower myself, ultimately nothing changes. And these are very heartfelt images to look at. If there is a symbolic representation of the female that is truly succinct and communicates what the female is within the religious context of the Iranian society, is this photograph by Amir Mobed. First of all, he takes apples and he makes certain cuts in them. He paints the apples white and he places some of the female's hair on some of these apples. These apples begin to rot and shrivel after a while, and he has taken various photographs of them during this particular process. So the apple is one representation of the female from a biblical standpoint. Of course, in the Islamic culture, it is the grain and not the apple. But nevertheless, the symbols of the apple has been brought in the last 400 years into the Islamic religious milieu as well. So the apple represents the female. The cuts in the apple represent the female sexuality, and the hair also represents the seductiveness or the seductive source within the female. But altogether, when you put it together, when you amalgamate these different signs together, what we have is a symbol, and a symbol of a female that is looked at as an object, a female who's been blamed for the fall of the man and for his expulsion from Eden, a female that as time processes shrivels up and is no longer sought by the male.
These, the way she or he has put it together is, it's, you know, colorful, but very impactful.